Our last keynote speaker of today started her career in consulting, but was quickly captured by what she calls the wonderful world of cybersecurity. She started working for Luit 9 years ago, at first as a cybersecurity consultant, and then she transitioned internally to the role of CISO in 2021, first for the Netherlands and later also for Belgium. Our speaker loves to meet people, to speak, to write, and to share her thoughts on social media about all kinds of topics. Unfortunately, her role as CISO didn't allow her much time for that, or didn't leave her much time for that. That's why she recently accepted a new role as the Principal of Services Benelux at the Information Security Forum. In fact, today is her second day on her new job, so congratulations are in order. She'll be bringing ISF's research and tools to its members in the Benelux, a role during which she can use all those social skills that she has under her belt. She's here to talk about what she learned in her time as a CISO, how you can support your senior leadership so they will become better able to govern cybersecurity adequately. Please welcome Esther Schagen-van Luit.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have the questionable honor of being the keynote speaker between you and a plate of bitterballen. But we're going to make it work, so hold tight. Today, we are going to discuss a new cybersecurity playbook for the executive and supervisory board. And to explain why we're going to talk about this, I first want to introduce you to who I am, apart from the wonderful introduction that Irene did for me, because I like to bring a personal story to the places where I go to speak. And this story is also very personal to me, based on the experiences that I've had interacting with my boards. So my name is Esther Schagen-van Luit, and originally I have a background in economics and management. I really wanted to learn what it was like to run a company. Then I found out about the wonderful world of cybersecurity and did a master's in cybersecurity at the Cybersecurity Academy that some of you might know. I then became a consultant, and then I had the wonderful privilege of being a CISO for 2 countries. Being a CISO for 2 countries meant I had 2 executive boards, 2 supervisory boards, and 2 executive committees to work with as a CISO. So I've gained quite some experience on engaging boards with very different kinds of people, different kinds of knowledge, and a different preference for how they wanted to be interacted with. And as Irene mentioned, I've recently joined as a Principal of Services for ISF. For those of you who don't know ISF, it is a member-driven, not-for-profit organization that goes and does research, produces tools, and delivers services for her members. Next to that, I have another interesting hobby that is focused on getting back into that more managerial space. So because my interactions with the executive and supervisory boards, I was really interested in the governance dynamics taking place in that scene. And so I started doing board education and taking up a board position. So I'm very passionate about diversity and inclusion. I'm very happy to see so many women in cyber here today. That for me has been a passion coming into the field. Not seeing a lot of women and deciding that I wanted to change that. So I go out to schools and speak about the work that I do and why it's great fun and other girls should consider doing it too. And I've been very active in recruitment and talent management fields, and I speak about that quite often. So becoming a board member for the Dutch Women Council seemed right to me as an experience to how to be on a board, if you will. Then I followed board training as well, enjoyed the CER Topvrouwen database, and most recently I've engaged in a program that's called Blikverruimers, which is targeted towards creating young supervisory board members, because it's very difficult to get your first board position. It's like getting your first job. People prefer you to have had a board position before when you join their boards. So I've been slowly making my way myself to joining an executive and supervisory board, as I feel my IT, risk, and cybersecurity experience could really add value to the way that we govern organizations in the Netherlands. If we look at the current landscape, then that is quite an interesting view. So what I've brought for you today is the top 100 supervisory board members in the Netherlands. They are called top 100 because it works according to a point system that management scope has thought up. So, if you will, some of the most influential people in this governance space. And then the question is, how many of these people actually have IT experience? So you see the green circles over here. Actually, I was happily surprised. I think it's more than I was expecting. I've taken IT experience quite broadly, so have either had a role that had something to do with IT or have been active in companies that were significantly involved in IT. However, the question then begs, of course, how many people have had actual experience with security? And unfortunately, only one person remains, and even that, I kind of had to grant. Is Wim Kuijken in the room by any chance? No? I feel bad for singling out Wim like this, but it's for positive reasons. Wim is the chairman of the Supervisory Board of the Hague Security Delta, and he's been so for over 4 years. He doesn't have, as far as I could tell from his public profile, any IT or security roles before that, but I figured if you are president of the Supervisory Board, and at least you honestly care about cybersecurity. That doesn't mean, of course, that there's no Supervisory Board members that have knowledge of cybersecurity. So some of you will have seen Loco present today. She had multiple sessions, and clearly she's very well versed in the fields of IT and of security. But in this group of 100 influential people running major boards in the Netherlands, Wim is the only one that I could find with an inkling of what cybersecurity is about. If we compare that to what that means for us in terms of Europe, so there's the Board Monitor Europe 2022, and this is a slide that shows the trend over these 2 years, and the different kinds of expertise of non-traditional board member profiles taking place in supervisory boards and executive boards. And as you can see, the cybersecurity was 5 and stays at 5. Of course, 2 years is not a lot to extrapolate a trend from, but we are seeing movement in some other areas where we see more non-traditional board profiles coming in, and that movement has not established itself so far for cybersecurity. And this is interesting because intuitively, you'd think that cybersecurity has become increasingly popular. It's more, well, popular, prevalent. It's more in the news. You'd think boards would take more interest in getting the expertise of cybersecurity on their boards, but that's also not what we're hearing back from recruiters. And even when I applied for the Blikverruimers Academy, I got the question, why would I want that? Had I not been approached many times by boards to take a seat on their board for my cybersecurity, IT, or risk experience? That is not true. So apparently there's currently not a great interest from the market to get cybersecurity professionals in supervisory and executive boards. If we then look at the current situation, we see that what is in boards is not a lot of cybersecurity experience, and not a lot of technology experience, which is interesting as many of the companies that we work for are deeply, deeply interconnected in technology by now. We also see that when it comes to educational programs for boards, they only really scratch the surface. So you'll often see a one-day return to learn something about boards program, and there's going to be a slot of 1 hour on cybersecurity, which is mostly FUD. It's mostly around ransomware and Log4j and everything that's wrong with the world. And board members come away from that thinking it's a serious issue, but not with any in-depth knowledge about what cybersecurity is or any real material to engage in conversations with the CISO. Then, fortunately for us, there's the Cybersecurity Raad. They have published a number of helpful guidance documents to help board members understand what kind of questions they need to ask from their CISO. And this is a really good start. It's just that that is the current state of where we are. So we have enabled people to ask questions from CISOs, but my personal experience is, if I answer those questions, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've understood what I've answered that. And so enabling a real conversation with the board about risk and cybersecurity, that has not materialized yet. We've just given them a list of questions that they can ask in a form for them to do due diligence. But there's not a real conversation, in my experience, with many people on boards on how cybersecurity should be managed and governed from their side. Then there's also the Corporate Governance Code, and the Corporate Governance Code is the leading document for board members to understand what their responsibilities are with being on a board. And there's been a recent new version published, and it does mention cybersecurity, which is very good. However, it goes about it in quite uncertain terms, saying it is important for long-term value creation, which is true. But we can often say things are important. That's great. It doesn't oblige them to do anything in terms of training or reporting in the area of cybersecurity. And so honestly, what happens in my experience is that the onus for having the conversation with the boards on cybersecurity is entirely with the CISO. It is initiated by the CISO, often proactively, in an effort to get clarity on strategy, gain support for budget, and sometimes ad hoc in case there is an incident or a zero-day vulnerability that we need to go and tell the board about in case it has business impact. There is not a lot of interest coming from the other way. Board members asking CISOs to bring them this or bring them that. And that is logical. They don't have the knowledge to go and ask those questions of the CISO very often. So it's a one-way street currently, and that sets us up for failure in the sense that, indeed, like Jay has said this morning, we are almost happy when there's an incident because that will allow us, it will give us a platform to go and talk to the board, and they will finally listen to what we've got to say, and maybe we'll get some extra budget, and that is great, but that is a toxic dynamic. We want the people leading our companies to take responsibility of the risk inside those companies, and particularly the cybersecurity risk, which I think insufficiently board members realize that it could be a company-ending risk. So if we talk about what there's currently in the market, you'll see a lot of things that are focused on helping the CISO engage with boards. So this is an example from an ISF publication, Engaging the Board, and it's a playbook for CISOs, where it's basically a plan, do, check, act cycle of making sure your cybersecurity is aligned with the goals of the company, then planning out how you're going to tell the board about what you're doing, then going to them, and then checking whether they were okay with it. And this is effectively how I've run the interaction with my board for quite a while. So I'd go in and I'd check in what format they wanted to be informed. We ended up going for a quarterly report that consisted of the top 3 risks, the top 3 improvements, and then some information on our stakeholder landscape, including regulators, auditors, what they were expecting from Deloitte, and then giving a status update on that. And then, of course, there would be the ad hoc situations where I'd go in and say, hey, listen, something with business impact is happening. And at some point, I got to have a lot of conversations with the supervisory board here in the Netherlands, who were interested in learning more and getting a deeper understanding. And so in this, it was very clear that not all board members had the same level of understanding of IT and security. So I run a full masterclass well, it is an entire day, but we run a masterclass to try and get everybody on the same page in terms of basics. What is security? What are we trying to protect? Who's trying to attack us and why? So very much focused around Deloitte and being very pragmatic around what they need to know as supervisory board members, but also providing them the basics of what security is and how it works for them to have a real conversation with me about what needs to happen within the company. So this is what we currently, most of us, I think, do. If we have a good relationship with the board and they actually allow us to do that on a frequent basis. However, there is a change in the market, and that's what I'd like to discuss now, because I'd really like to shift it to more ownership with the boards themselves. But before we can do that, some things need to happen to enable that. And we're now going to go to one of my lesser favorite topics, is regulation. I'd first like to start off with DORA. So in DORA, there is a segment specifically on the responsibilities for boards, for management bodies, as they call it. And we have a 2-tier board structure here in the Netherlands. So this affects both the executive board and the supervisory board. And I think Clause A says it all. It bears the ultimate responsibility for managing the financial entity's risk. And then below that, there's a number of bullets where I've highlighted the main words in red of what they then need to be involved in, aware with, and approve of, which is actually, it's quite a lot. It's quite detailed what they then need to understand in order to sign off on these things according to DORA. It also contains a reference to appropriate budget. So this is interesting with regards to Lorena's point this morning, where she talked about getting enough budget and getting them to understand what budget is required to run security properly in an organization, which DORA will support us with. And I think the last point, point 4, is also interesting. So there is an explicit requirement here for boards to go out and actively keep up to date with knowledge in the field to be able to do all those things. Then the second regulation I wanted to look at, yes, apologies for bringing a second, it's NIS2, which effectively has a different scope in terms of entities, but it says the same. So management bodies should be able to approve the cybersecurity risk management measures taken, and they are liable for its infringements. And that is going to be a very scary thing, I think, for people who are not used to that concept of being liable. And the second point is also that it's again stipulated that they need to follow training. So how will we go about this? It's very nice that regulation then asks this of us. How are we going to do this with our boards in practice who are currently engaging with us on a hopefully periodical basis where we bring knowledge to them, and all of a sudden these regulations come in and ask them to get training, to get knowledge, to go and retrieve that in order for them to be able to execute cybersecurity governance adequately. So I'd like to talk about 3 ways of formalizing competence. So of course, I think you're familiar with the ISO standard, but maybe the other 2 frameworks, they are less well known. The one to the left is the European Cybersecurity Skills Framework that was released last year. And it is a framework that describes different roles in cybersecurity and then goes and lists the knowledge, skills, and abilities and the tasks and to what level you need to be able to do them to be a great, I don't know, cybersecurity incident responder. The one to the right, NIS, is an American framework. It is very much focused on the American government. It's much older, so it's been around since 2017, and it's updated on a 3-yearly basis. And that also contains work profiles and knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need to be able to do for each of those roles. I think ISO 27001 is particularly interesting in this regard because of its section on competence management, 7.2, which says, and this is my second least favorite thing after quoting legislation, is quoting policies and standards. The organization should determine the competence of the people doing work, ensure that they are competent on the basis of training, then document that. And if they are not competent yet, ensure that they take action to become competent. And many of you shall be familiar in storing this information in something like a competence matrix, where we list the stakeholders, then say what they should be able to do, how well they should be able to do it, what training is required or certification to get that competence, and then make sure it's checked off that they actually do it, and here's the certificate to prove that we did it, dear ISO auditor. So that is a wonderful framework for kind of documenting off what people in your organization are capable of doing in terms of cybersecurity, but it often stops at the CISO. I've not seen matrices where the executive board is included, and for sure I've not seen matrices where the supervisory board is included. So that is where I think some of this could be landing in. But then your question is, of course, Esther, how am I going to figure out what my board should then be able to do? I think in part that is in the statements of the regulation, makes it very concrete on which topics the board is expected to be able to act. So there is some points for what you could fill that competence matrix in. But then going back to the previous 2 frameworks I mentioned, so the European Cybersecurity Skills Framework has these roles in it. And these roles, as you can tell, there is no boards in there either. The highest level is CISO, and then there's something else relevant, which I think is the risk manager, because effectively that is what boards should be doing, managing the risk within their organization to an acceptable level. If you then dive into the frameworks itself, you do see that the risk manager profile is too low level to be applicable to boards. And then the CISO role, it has some management elements in it, of course, but it's not exactly the same as what boards should be doing. But there's some inspiration for you there if you want to build a competence matrix around your board. And then the second one is the NIST SP 800-181, which is the NIS framework I was referencing earlier. So there's two roles in there which are similar to what boards are doing. One is the executive cyber leadership, which is effectively the CISO role, except the American government probably doesn't have something like that. And then there's something called authorizing official, which is somebody with a lot of authority to approve things happening, except in the framework, if you look at the knowledge, skills, and abilities, you see it's a much lower level. It's around a single information system, which given the scale of the American government, I can imagine, but it's not the total system that we're effectively looking for with boards. So then if we're discussing the way forward, the reason why I'm not providing a single competence matrix here for your boards is because it's going to depend on whether you are in scope for DORA and NIS2, what kind of board members you have on your board, and how you feel they should be given what your company is, given insight to those requirements from DORA and NIS2. But I do think it's good that if you are in scope of DORA and NIS2, that you go and have that conversation with your board members, that this is coming and it's going to change the way that you interact with each other. It should change the way that you interact with each other. If it's now a one-way street, it should be a two-way street. They should become more proactive in asking you what is happening in your organization and whether that is good enough for the organization. I also think that the competence matrix, as we're used to using it within ISO 27001, is a great way for documenting what we're expecting from boards, being transparent to them, what is required from you, and then being very pragmatic in what we'd like to see. If you look at some of these frameworks in detail, you'll see quite a lot of knowledge, skills, and abilities. And I think given how busy board members are, it's not realistic to expect them to learn about 50 different topics. So I think it would be fair to be pragmatic about this and really focus on what matters most for your company, and then put that in the competence matrix, lock it in, and then immediately have it as evidence for both ISO 27001, DORA, and NIS2. And support boards in skilling up as an SME. So many of you security professionals know a lot about security, and they should be looking to you partially for getting them where they need to be. I also think that there's a role here for the industry as a whole, and maybe some of you are in a position to explore that, because as I mentioned, the current set of educational programs is very limited. It is very much, we're going to give you a general sense of what cybersecurity is about and make you scared by the time you leave. There's no extensive programs that are really geared, like I did with my masterclass, to build knowledge up in as short as time as possible on what cybersecurity is, what they need to know. That, of course, also depends on the kind of look and feel of your entire board and whether there's others with IT and security expertise on there. But I think a board-wide training would be good to establish as a basis before going forward with periodical updates. And that should be for the entire board. I think it's, even though I opened with the slide on how many board members there are with IT and security expertise, you can't make it the responsibility of a single person on your board. Yes, it would be great to have an SME there, but it needs to, given the regulation, needs to be a collective board experience. And in boards, people always rely on the person with most experience, but you all need to know something about it in order to have a real conversation with each other. An alternative way of doing that better is also elevating the CISO closer to the board position. So it depends, of course, where the CISO is in your organization, but oftentimes we see that there's still at least one layer between the CISO and the board. Could be a CIO, CRO, depends. But elevating them closer to that position, or even including them in the board, could already resolve some of this tension of not having the right knowledge on board to have these kinds of discussions. And then agree on the two-way information exchange that I talked about. So how's that going to look like in practice? Make some clear agreements on what that means for you both, in order to have the board also have a sense of control on how they're able to execute on these requirements from DORA and NIS2. And then lastly, push for more security board members. And with that, I'd like to close off, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther.
Thank you, Irene.
It is not, thank you so much. Esther Schagen van Luit.